Does my child have autism? This is one of the burning questions from parents when worried about their child's development, or they might see certain traits in the child that might indicate autism. Also, parents want to know, in terms of future planning for education, i.e. does my child need a dedicated one-to-one care, or if their child needs to attend a special needs school, or can they remain in a mainstream school? And also for the future, when transitioning into adulthood, how independent will they be? How will this affect them in relationships, career, or job prospects? For example, lack of emotion, if not picked up in early childhood, can affect them in future relationships. So what is autism? Autism is a lifelong developmental disorder that affects social communication, interaction, and behaviour. Let me make it clear that autism is not a disease. But in certain people, the brain just works differently from others in how they view the world, so that they have different ways of experiencing the world from others, in terms of learning and reacting to situations around them. In the UK, autism affects 1 in 100 people, and mainly boys with a ratio of 4:1 compared to girls. It is thought that this ratio is underestimated, as girls do not display the same type of stereotyped behaviour as boys do, so they're much harder to diagnose. Autism starts from the womb, and some features might start to show in your child before the age of 3, but this can be very difficult to diagnose, as at that age they're still very dependent and every child develops differently. For example, you cannot compare 2 kids of the same age, as one kid might start to speak a bit quicker than the other kid. If you have 2 kids, you cannot compare their speech and say, oh, at 18 months old my child was doing this, but this child's not doing it, as every child develops at a different pace. Or you cannot compare 2 kids in the same class of the same age. Autism now comes under a spectrum known as the Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. This means that everyone experiences autism differently. Under the spectrum, you have a range of mild to severe autism, where some children need little support to other children needing 24/7 support. Under ASD, you have Aspergers syndrome, atypical autism, childhood autism, and others. But I'll use the word autism for simplification. With Asperger's syndrome, this is a mild form of autism where people have above average intelligence and they're known as high functioning individuals, but they still have problems in terms of communication and social interaction, for instance preferring to be alone and not understanding jokes or being sarcastic. Now let's look at the signs that might tell you if your child has autism. The signs of autism vary widely from one child to another, and as a parent you know better than anyone else, including doctors, so you might have to follow your instincts if you suspect your child has autism. We'll be looking at 3 areas up to the age of 3, mainly social interaction in terms of how your child relates with others, verbal and non-verbal communication, and behaviour. So let's look at social communication and interaction. So when should you worry? So by 6 to 9 months, if your child's not looking at you during breast or bottle feeding, if you're smiling to the child and not smiling back, or there's a lack of facial expression, they're not showing if they're happy, sad, angry, or upset. By 12 months, you might notice that your child is not responding to their name being called several times, but they might respond to other sounds such as maybe a car beeping or a dog barking. Or maybe your child is not babbling or doing any of that baby talk. You might notice that your child has very few or no gestures where they're not pointing at objects, or not waving goodbye, or making any noises to catch your attention. Again, you notice that there is lack of eye contact during feeding. By 15 months, you might notice that your child is not saying any words like mama or dada. By 18 months, you might notice that your child is not sharing any of the interests, such as sharing an object that he or she likes. Or maybe they're not pointing at things as a way of telling you what they want, or when you point at things, they're not looking in that direction. By 24 months, you might notice that your child is showing maybe a lack of empathy or concern. For example, if you pretend to be hurt or sad or crying, your child just does not seem interested. You might notice that your child is not saying any 2-word phrases like bye-bye, thank you, or all gone. You might notice that they keep repeating the same phrases or words over and over again, without really understanding the meaning. For example, if you said say goodbye, the child might say goodbye, rather than actually saying goodbye. And they'll keep repeating this over and over again. By 30 months, you might notice that there is a lack of creativity and imagination in the way your child plays with others. For example, they might not want to play any pretend games like pretend doctor, pretend nurse, or try and feed the dog. They might also struggle to make friends, whether they're in a playgroup or the nursery, not joining in with others to play. They might prefer to play alone, or you might notice that they tend to play with adults all the time. And by the age of 3, you might also notice that they're still having problems understanding their own feelings, or they're not talking about their own feelings or being able to express how they feel in terms of whether they're sad or angry. In terms of regression, some children start to develop language skills usually between the age of 12 and 24 months, For example, a child might start saying mommy, daddy, goodbye, and they might stop using this language entirely. Or you might notice that they might stop playing games that they used to enjoy, such as peekaboo or patty cake. So any loss of speech, babbling, gestures, or lack of social skills should be taken very seriously, and regression is usually classed as a major red flag for autism. In terms of behaviour and interest, you might notice that the child lines up their toys in a certain way every time, and they get upset when this order is changed. Again, there's lack of creativity and imagination, as you notice that your child is fixated with a particular activity, or they play with toys the same way every time, or they keep being fixated on that particular object, such as the wheels of a toy, spinning it round and round. For example, you might notice that the child keeps doing this, rather than actually playing with the whole toy. Or you might notice that they're fixated with other objects, such as keys or light switches, or playing with buttons, or remote controls, or anything that's not a toy. Kids with autism like a strict daily routine, and this enables them to understand what's happening in their own world. And they get upset when the strict daily routine is interrupted, or any minor changes to the routine can cause them to be distressed or anxious. It could be a change from wearing the same clothes, or you find out that they like eating the same food every day, and if you introduce a different food, they get upset. Some children with autism also have repetitive movements, such as flapping their hands, flicking their fingers, rocking the body, jumping, walking on tiptoes, or they keep spinning in circles over and over again. This gives them a calming and soothing effect, especially when anxious or stressed. And it's also something that they enjoy doing. As they get older, you might notice that your child is very passionate about specific subjects such as maths or sports like football, to the point where they can memorize and recite answers or sporting statistics. Let's look at sensory information. Some children might find it very difficult to process sensory information, which can lead to sensory overload. You might find that they're very sensitive to smell, touch, sounds, light and texture, or they might not be sensitive at all. For example, they might find vacuum cleaners or music playing in the background very loud, and this can cause them extreme distress. Or they might not like certain textures like fabrics or touching or hugging people, as they find this uncomfortable. Some children might also find being in school playgrounds or supermarkets or shopping centres due to the crowds and being very noisy. So apart from delayed language development, which is one of the main features of autism, delayed movement skills, you might notice that children with autism also have other characteristics such as being very hyperactive or impulsive, or they lack attention, like for example, you might notice that they don't finish various tasks, they're jumping from one task to the other. They're hyperactive, they're running around all the time, they seem to have boundless energy. Sometimes they might have other medical problems such as epilepsy or seizure disorders. You might find that they have very unusual eating habits, that they rarely eat anything at all, or they rarely have enough good sleep, they're very hyperactive at night, they want to play all the time, they wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning wanting to play. Some children with autism also have tummy problems such as constipation or tummy pain, and sometimes they find it very difficult to verbalize this to the parents. And you notice that children with autism, they have lots of anxiety, they get very stressed in certain situations, as you mentioned. And some children with autism that have a lack of fear, like they can stand on the edge of a train platform and just not be afraid that there's an oncoming train, not having the knowledge that they need to move backwards, or they tend to have a lack of sense of danger. Or you might find the opposite, where children with autism are very fearful. Like if you go into the doctor's room, they kick off straight away, or if they go into a room with strangers, they tend to kick off and be crying and very upset. So to summarize, the common signs of autism to look out for are lack of eye contact, delayed speech and communication skills, strict daily routine and being very upset when there's any minor changes to the routine, being very reactive and sensitive to light, sounds, touch and smells, and difficulty engaging with people and understanding other people's emotions. You have to remember that the brain in a young child is very neuroplastic. So this means that the brain has the ability to rewire itself. So therefore, if autism is caught early on, treatment can take full advantage of this and the child can actually reverse back to normal. So although autism is hard to diagnose before 24 months, if you can detect any signs by the age of 18 months, treatment started early would help to hopefully rewire the brain and reverse some of the symptoms or all the symptoms. So if you notice any signs that your child might have autism, do not ignore the signs. It's very important to get a professional involved so that early on your child will gain the full benefits of treatment. It is also important to recognize that children with autism have very specific strengths. They're very attentive to detail, which is a good sign. They're very trustworthy, tell the truth. They don't tell lies, they're very, they're straight down the line. And if they make a promise, they rarely break that promise. If they tell you they'll do the maths, they'll do the maths. If they tell you they'll stop watching that, they'll stop watching that. And as they get older, they can translate some of these attributes into very useful skills in adulthood. I'll be doing more videos on autism, looking at possible causes like the MMR vaccine, how do we diagnose autism, as well as managing autism. So please, if you like this video, share, like and subscribe to my channel.